The lecture hall at NYU Stern buzzed like a hive on the brink of chaos, a cavernous room packed with over 100 students shuffling in under the weight of heavy backpacks and steaming coffee cups. It was a crisp October afternoon in 2025, the kind where the air outside carried the faint scent of fallen leaves and chimney smoke. But inside, the heat of too many bodies pressed together made the space feel stifling. The high ceilings echoed with the rustle of notebooks, the clatter of laptop keys, and the low hum of whispered conversations. Sunlight streamed through tall arched windows, casting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor, while the faint ticking of an old wall clock punctuated the anticipation. This wasn't just any class, it was Professor Emily Riley's Economics 301, a course infamous for its intensity and her unrelenting wit. Emily strode to the front of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood, a sound that cut through the chatter like a blade. At 48, she was a force, tall and lean, with dark hair streaked with silver pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that could pin you to your seat from across the room. Her reputation preceded her, brilliant, unapologetic, and prone to slicing through bullshit with the precision of a surgeon. Today, her navy blazer was crisp, her expression sly, and the marker in her hand twirled like a conductor's baton as she launched into her lecture, Ethics in Business. "Let's get to it," she said, her voice ringing out, clear and commanding. "Mismanagement, corporate greed, the kind of decisions that tank companies and ruin lives." The class snapped to attention, pencils poised, screens glowing. But in the front row, amid the sea of eager faces, sat Barron Trump, tall, broad-shouldered, and quieter than the rest. At 19, he was a freshman with a presence that didn't demand attention, but couldn't quite avoid it either. His dark hair was neatly combed, his navy sweater understated, and his notebook lay open before him, untouched so far. Most students knew who he was. How could they not? But few dared to acknowledge it outright. He wasn't here to flaunt his name. He'd enrolled under the radar, just another kid chasing a degree. Yet his calm demeanor hid a storm of thoughts, a lifetime of scrutiny packed into those steady hazel eyes. Emily's lecture took a turn, her tone sharpening as she zeroed in on a target. "Let's talk about Donald Trump," she said, a smirk tugging at her lips. "A so-called billionaire whose ethics are as questionable as his hairline." Nervous laughter rippled through the room, a wave of unease masked as amusement. She didn't stop there. His real estate ventures? Overinflated failures propped up by hype. His leadership? Textbook narcissism. Arrogance dressed up as strategy. The air thickened, the scent of coffee mingling with the tension that settled over the students like a fog. Some shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances at Barron, who sat still as stone, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a faint howl underscoring Emily's escalating critique. Inside, the room felt smaller, the walls closing in as her words grew personal. Barron's classmates whispered, quick, hushed exchanges like static, but no one dared meet his gaze. He was a Trump, yes, but he was also just a kid in a lecture hall, caught in the crosshairs of a professor's razor-sharp tongue. And as Emily slammed her marker on the podium, punctuating her takedown of Donald Trump's infamous bankruptcies, the collective breath of the room held, waiting for what came next. Emily paced the front of the lecture hall, her energy electric, feeding off the silence she'd commanded. "Take his art of the deal," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A masterclass in over-promising and under-delivering. Look at the Atlantic City fiasco. Millions lost, jobs gone, all because one man thought he could spin failure into gold." She flipped through a stack of notes, projecting a grainy image of a crumbling casino onto the screen behind her. The room dimmed slightly as the projector hummed, casting shadows that danced across the students' faces. "This," she declared, pointing at the screen, "is what you don't do if you want to succeed in business." The marker hit the podium again, a crack like thunder. The tension was a living thing now, coiling tighter with every word. Students fidgeted. Jake, a wiry sophomore with a mop of curly hair, chewed his pen cap to splinters. Sarah, a junior with a perpetual frown, scribbled notes so fast her wrist cramped. They weren't just uncomfortable, they were transfixed, caught between admiration for Emily's boldness and dread for Barron's silence. He hadn't moved, his hands resting on his notebook, but his knuckles whitened briefly, a flicker of strain beneath his composure. His classmates darted glances his way, some with pity, others with curiosity. Would he crack? Would he storm out? The clock ticked louder, a metronome to the mounting pressure. Emily, perhaps emboldened by the lack of pushback, leaned into her critique. "What's truly remarkable," she said, her eyes glinting, "is how someone can fail so spectacularly and still brand themselves a genius. It's spin over substance, folks. A lesson in marketing, not ethics." The room was a crypt, the earlier laughter replaced by a suffocating stillness. Jake whispered to Sarah, "She's going too far." But Sarah just shook her head, eyes wide. Barron's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze locked on Emily as if dissecting her every syllable. He wasn't angry, not visibly, but there was a fire in him, smoldering beneath the surface. Then it happened. Barron shifted, a small movement that sent a jolt through the room. He raised his hand, steady and deliberate, and the air crackled with electricity. Every head turned, every breath caught. Emily froze mid-sentence, her marker hovering over the podium. "Yes?" she asked, her voice measured but laced with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to dare. Barron paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, his classmates' eyes boring into him like spotlights. When he spoke, his voice was calm, deep, and unshaken. "I'd like to say something, if that's okay." Emily nodded, stepping back slightly, her expression unreadable. Barron leaned forward, hands clasped on his desk, and the room leaned with him. "My father taught me something about success," he began, his tone even but firm. "He taught me that behind every achievement, there's a team, people who work hard, who stay loyal, who believe in the vision even when it's tough. I've seen it myself. Resilience, dedication, those are the values he passed down." His gaze swept the room briefly, meeting a few stunned stares before returning to Emily. "That's what I try to live by." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Jake stopped chewing his pen. Sarah's pencil stilled. Barron wasn't done. His tone softened, but an edge of conviction crept in. "I get that public figures like my dad are fair game for criticism. They should be. It's part of accountability. But there's a line between calling out flaws and turning someone into a punching bag for everything we don't like. No one's perfect, and no one builds anything alone. I think we owe it to ourselves to see the whole picture. Strengths and weaknesses, not just the easy shots." The climax hit like a thunderclap, not in volume, but in impact. The room was silent, charged with a mix of awe and introspection. Barron's words weren't a defense born of blind loyalty. They were a plea for fairness, delivered with a sincerity that cut through the noise. Emily's smirk faded, her marker lowering as she absorbed the weight of his response. The students didn't know whether to clap or shrink into their seats. Barron sat back, his composure intact, but his presence loomed larger than ever. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, until a faint rustle broke it. Sarah shifting in her seat, her frown replaced by a thoughtful crease. Emily set her marker down, stepping out from behind the podium, her usual sharpness softened by something new. Respect. "You make a fair point," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "It's easy to tear into the negative, especially with someone as polarizing as your father. But you've reminded me there's more to every story than the headlines." Barron nodded, his expression steady. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said simply. A ripple of applause broke out. Not loud, but earnest. A quiet acknowledgement of Barron's grace under fire. Emily hesitated, then added, "And thank you for speaking up. It takes guts to do that." The tension eased, the room exhaling as the lecture resumed. But the energy had shifted. Students who'd been silent now raised hands, tossing out questions with a boldness they hadn't shown before. Barron listened, jotting notes, letting others take the leads. The spell of his words lingered, a thread woven into the fabric of the day. As the class ended, the shuffle of packing bags felt slower, heavier, as if no one wanted to break the moment. Barron stood, slipping his notebook into his bag, when a voice stopped him. "Hey," said Mia, a soft-spoken junior with braided hair and a shy smile. "What you said, it really hit me. I think we all needed that." Barron offered a polite nod. "Thanks. I just think there's more to every story than what's on the surface." Others approached, Jake clapping him on the shoulder, Sarah giving a quick thumbs up, small gestures of solidarity that carried weight. Outside, the courtyard was a mosaic of autumn, crimson leaves crunching underfoot, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Barron found a bench beneath a sprawling oak, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. He sat, breathing deeply, the tension melting from his shoulders. His phone buzzed, a text from his mom. "Heard about your class. Proud of you." He smiled, typing back, "Thanks, Mom," before pocketing the device. Footsteps crunched nearby, and he looked up to see Emily approaching, a coffee cup in one hand, a folder in the other. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Of course," Barron replied, gesturing to the empty spot. She sat, sipping her coffee before speaking. 20 years teaching, and I can count on one hand the times the students challenged me like that. Respectfully, I mean. Barron tilted his head. "I wasn't trying to challenge you. I just thought the conversation needed balance." She chuckled. "And that's why it mattered. You didn't lash out, you spoke with clarity. That's rare." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of campus life swirling around them, students laughing, bikes whirring past. "You reminded me why I teach," Emily said finally. "Not to preach, but to spark real dialogue. I'll be rethinking how I approach some things after today." Barron smiled faintly. "We all need that reminder sometimes. My dad always said you don't have to agree, but you should try to understand." She nodded, standing. "Good advice. Thanks, Barron, for giving me a lesson, too." He stood as well. "Thank you for letting me speak." As she walked away, Barron lingered, watching the courtyard bustle. A quiet pride settled over him, not for defending his father, but for turning confrontation into connection. By evening, texts from classmates trickled in. "You were awesome. Made me think twice." And he realized he'd planted a seed, not of agreement, but of understanding. As he headed home, the October sky deepening to dusk, he hoped that seed would grow, a small ripple in a world too quick to judge.